Stand ready for my arrival, worm.
Here we are with another top 5 list in the top 5 series making videos. Today's video we're going to be going over the top 5 underrated towers in TDS. Not so much forgotten or terrible towers, but more or less towers that are very fucking good, however, despite having a low pick rate.
Number 18.
Barely making it to number 5 spot we have is the turret. Now I know this is going to be very controversial, but let me explain. So the turret, as you guys all know, currently is one of the best, strongest towers in the entire game. And quite honestly, it wasn't always like this, because beforehand you can actually place up to 5 of these turrets instead of the current meta where you can only place down 3 of these guys per player. And despite only being able to place down 5, they were still somewhat good, but not really that great. But then they got a pretty big, I guess, buff, you could say, to where they completely removed 2 spots that you can actually place down, and now reserving only to 3. And instead, also increasing an insane amount of damage to these guys with a very, very fast rate of fire. Literally, no joke, these guys at max deal 55 damage per shot at an insanely fast rate of fire speed. So you're probably thinking, why is he on this list then? Well, that's because despite him being a very, very good tower in this game, there are still a little bit more better options, and the turret has seen a much more better pick rate rise currently because of the Ducky event, the bunny final boss. He's a pretty big pain in the ass, and these turrets absolutely disintegrate him. And quite honestly, to me, I don't know what it is, but the skins for the turret are actually really good. They all look super beefy and like they can actually, just like the description, actually chew bosses because of the insane amount of damage, high rate of fire, and everything else. Barely making it onto the list, but even though it did, it is nowhere near the bottom, but there are still slightly more better options like the Engineer, Pursuits, Rangers, and others.
Number 10.
Not too much of a surprise, number 4 spot is the Trapper. Now, some of you guys know that a while ago I actually made a video on this guy and how he was literally one of the most underrated character towers in this entire game. And of course, I am still riding on that. This man is still pretty damn underrated. And there's actually some pretty good reasons on why. Now, at first, when he was first released into this game, I believe a year ago at this point, he was quite honestly one of the most hyped up characters in this entire game because a literal tower being able to place down traps and shit on the path was unheard of at all. So this was quite honestly an immense hype train, as literally the next day passed by, his entire hype train just completely crashed to the ground. And he's more or less just a meh-ish character, but that doesn't mean he's bad in any way. His traps being able to deal a decent amount of damage, and as you all know, the more you upgrade him, the much more damage and firepower each of these traps actually do. He only has 3 traps, which is the first one, the spike trap, which usually just makes enemies trip up, and then there's the explosive, and then we finally have the bear trap, which stuns any enemies except bosses and those types of sorts. But being able to stun and deal in a great amount of damage is always very nice and satisfying. The one big reason on why he's mainly underrated is because, just like for the turret kind of, there are just much better options, especially for the early game. Characters like, for an example, the Cowboy, who can give you money every 6 shots and has a big range, while the Trapper on the other hand has a pretty small range and only can work with the path. But still, that does not mean he's a bad tower in any way, and quite honestly, being underrated is kind of a bit sad, and quite honestly, he does deserve a little bit more attention.
Number 7.
Blessing us at the number 3 spot is the Medic. So as you all know, the Medic is one of the few and or many support towers in this game of TDS. And unlike the other support towers, the Medic is not that good, to say the least. For an example, the commander can boost rate of fire troops around him, making him an incredibly strong support tower. Then the DJ being able to apply many bonuses to many characters or towers around him. The medic, on the other hand, it doesn't help towers nearby at all until the very last level. What does the medic do? Well, the medic essentially repairs and or replenishes any health that your main base's HP has taken from any enemies that actually manage to slip by. And on paper, this sounds like a really strong passive ability, but in hindsight and actual gameplay, the chances and or time situations when enemies actually slip past and deal damage to your base is incredibly low, especially when they actually deal damage. It is a very small amount to where it's not really a big deal whatsoever. And this passive ability in game is just not really that good. Neat, but not really that crucial. But the reason why the medic isn't at the number 1 or number 2 spot for being super underrated and or forgotten in this entire game is because of her actual activation ability at the last upgrade level. Because at the last upgrade level, she actually unlocks an ability to where she can cleanse and or fix any nearby towers after being attacked by any enemies with stun attack moves, like being sliced in the head. And quite honestly, if it wasn't for this ability, then the medic would have just been quite honestly one of the worst support towers. And even despite the big buff where they decreased the cooldown from 30 seconds to 15 seconds, she still isn't really that crucial.
Number 5.
The number 2 spot we have is the Pursuit, more or less, or more specifically, the AoE. As you all know, once you get the Pursuit to, level 3 or 4, you unlock 2 different upgrade options for the Pursuit. The first one, aka the top one, is simply just immensely upgrading the DPS damage, however, to 1 enemy at a time, while the bottom upgrade upgrades, well, AoE damage. On hindsight and or on paper, that sounds like an amazing upgrade, like literally being able to damage much more enemies in an area, aka altogether, is quite honestly super strong. Until you actually use the upgrade, he is not really that amazing. Now, don't get me wrong, the upgrade or the AoE Pursuit is not bad at all. It's just that compared to the MVP single damage DPS Pursuit of the top upgrade, it is definitely not a competition whatsoever. Single damage one just completely disintegrates enemies mercilessly in seconds, while the second option, still being able to wreak havoc to multiple enemies, in the later game of TDS and or game modes where you're fighting polluted monster, hardcore enemies, or just generally much stronger enemies who have hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of HP, the AoE option doesn't really actually do that much damage compared to the single damage DPS dealing Pursuit upgrades. There's really no surprise on why the top option upgrade for the Pursuit is much more popular than the bottom one.
Number 1.
Check this out.
There's no way. Danger. Quicksand.
A pretty big surprise at the number 1 spot we have is the Frost Blaster. Now, I'm not too surprised if some of you guys have never heard of this guy or I've completely forgotten about this guy, because I kind of forgot about this guy too as well, not gonna lie. This man, aka the Frost Blaster, isn't bad whatsoever. Like, let me just go ahead and reiterate that. He is not bad. Actually trying him out, I was actually surprised on how well this man actually performed. The only problem with this man is that there's a lot more stun and temporarily slowing down and or freezing towers in your arsenal that you can unlock. For an example, the Cryomancer, the Sledger, and definitely a few more ice dudes and or slower towers like Brawler that I'm definitely forgetting at the top of my head. This man, so what does he do exactly? Well, unlike the freezing towers, I guess you could say, he more or less has a freeze rifle. Freeze and slow down many enemies in a single shot as long as they're all kind of in a line together. On paper, this sounds really good because being able to first off deal pretty good amount of damage and slow down and or freeze many enemies with a single shot sounds really good. But of course, just like I've been saying all this entire time, there are just much better options. For an example, Sledger, who can freeze and slow down and deal very high damage to many enemies. Elementalist, who has a literal Frost Blaster as well, and has a even freezing turn as well. Quite honestly, there are just so many better options, and it's no surprise to where you literally find this man in a literal museum because of how extinct his pick rate is.